about, well, from the age of 12 until 30, he mystically appeared somewhere, magically appeared somewhere. I mean, we hear these things all the time, and complete religions have been incorporating these things into the life of Jesus without any truth to them. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode as we look at how to defend our faith and understanding why we believe and why we believe what we believe. And this is exciting. Don Stewart is with me. Don is the founder of Educating Our World. I encourage you to go there. Don's ministry is fantastic. Just on the website alone, educatingourworld.com. He has entire series on the Bible, God, Jesus Christ, Bible and science, the unseen world, Holy Spirit, humanity and salvation, humanity, sin and salvation, the church, Bible prophecy, Christian living, the afterlife, along with 66 books and a whole lot more. You go to any of those subjects and you're going to be super blessed. Educatingourworld.com with Don Stewart. Don, welcome again.
Thanks again for having me, Tom. Love doing these things with you.
Oh, this is great. And this is what the church needs. It's also what people who don't even know the Lord need. I mean, they have an opportunity to say, well, what do Christians really believe? Or what does the Bible really say? Because there's a lot of wrong stuff that's out there. So I'm glad we get to do this.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you ready? First question.
Do it.
Years ago, long time ago, I remember this group coming out called the Jesus Seminar.
Yep.
And they made claims of what Jesus said and what he really didn't say. And then I remember about the same time I'm hearing, well, you can only trust the words that are in the red in your Bible. And then I remember hearing, well, you can't even trust that. We have a group that has decided what Jesus really did say. Don, I look at that. What's your input on the Jesus Seminar and the things that they have said about Jesus?
Yeah, the Jesus Seminar was popular. They formed in 1985. They disbanded in 2006. And they had a group of scholars. Now, what's interesting, they weren't the best New Testament scholars, but they got together and they were going to decide what Jesus said and what he didn't say. And sadly, they ended up with Jesus only saying about 20% of what's in the New Testament. Now, here's the problem, Tom. They start with these presuppositions, 5 of them. Number 1, the supernatural doesn't exist. Number 2, Jesus couldn't have worked miracles. Number 3, he couldn't have predicted the future. Number 4, he never made the fantastic claims attributed to him, like being God the Son. And number 5, the Gospels are written long after AD 70. And then after starting with those presuppositions, they honestly and objectively start looking at the facts. Now, what's wrong with this picture? Well, the problem is they've already predetermined the outcome. So anything to do with the supernatural can't be there. Jesus never predicted the future. That can't happen. Sorry. Miracles? No, there's no such thing as miracles. And so never made the claims about himself. The disciples put words in his mouth much later. And so that they have to argue that the Gospels were written after everybody was long dead, so no one could check out the evidence. So they're typical of what's gone on in the history of the church. And reason we mentioned them, they were popular at one time. They got a lot of airtime. But the same sort of nonsense still shows up, Tom, that, if God, here's the thing, if God wanted to come down in the person of God the Son, second person of the Trinity, and do the things that Jesus did and say the things that he said, they rule it out ahead of time. In other words, they won't even allow something like that to happen. So what they do, they just say that miracles couldn't happen. Jesus never was whom he claimed to be or who the New Testament claims he is. And so with a wave of their hand, they just dismiss the Christian faith. The problem is a lot of these guys are dead now and they know better because they're in the presence of the Lord, or they had to face the Lord anyway. And so this is not untypical. But as we've talked about here, as we continue to, as we document, the evidence is just the opposite. Jesus did make the claims about himself that the New Testament has. He was a miracle worker. In fact, one of the points we make in the New Testament, Tom, is in fact, let me go further. the first 5 centuries of the Christian era, every single account about Jesus that's come down to us, either believer or unbeliever, every single account has him working miracles. Nobody denied the miracles of Jesus. They couldn't, and they certainly did in the New Testament. And when they say Jesus couldn't have predicted the future, well, some of the things Jesus predicted took place far beyond, AD 70 and beyond that. And so the bottom line is when you run across things like that, and if you go to some type of secular college, you're going to get something to this effect still. If you take a New Testament class or the professor starts, waxing eloquent about things he or she doesn't know about, like God and Jesus, you'll hear stuff like this. But here's the bottom line. Just ain't true. That simple.
It ain't true. And man, we do hear these things. It's done a lot of damage because there's a lot of pastors that actually teach that nonsense too, because they don't believe the Bible. Question number 2, what do we know of Jesus' earlier years? Because, I hear a lot of talk about, well, from the age of 12 until 30, he mystically appeared somewhere, magically appeared somewhere. I mean, we hear these things all the time, and complete religions have been incorporating these things into the life of Jesus without any truth to them. So what do we actually know?
Yeah, here's what we do know. Now, for better or worse, the only firsthand account we have of the life and ministry of Jesus is in the New Testament. So apart from that, and apart from an incident at age 12, we know nothing about what happened right after his birth when the Holy Family came back and brought him back from Egypt. They moved up to Nazareth. Then the incident in Luke's gospel at age 12 in the temple. We know nothing about him until basically his public ministry began. And so what happened was, Tom, as you can imagine, after the New Testament was written, there was the desire to know more. So people started making up stories about Jesus, a lot of fanciful stories. Took place. The Arabic gospel of the infancy. This is what's really interesting. As a romantic story about the silent years. When Joseph and Mary were on the way to Egypt, the baby Jesus, we're told that robbers met them. They found nothing to steal from this couple, but they did not, because they didn't have any money. The robbers had compassion on the young couple with the child and gave them provisions and sent them along the way. And what happens? One of the helpful robbers appears many years later. He was the repentant thief that was crucified next to Jesus on the cross. I mean, stories like, yeah, that's quite a story, isn't it?
I haven't heard that one yet.
Yeah, a charming story. The Arabic gospel of the infancy, it's called. And so basically I guess this guy was a good robber, but he was even crucified, I guess, for being a good robber. But then he saw Jesus and he repented at the end. And so they all happily ever after, I guess. So anyway, it's stories like that. Now, again, here's the point. There were no miracles before his public ministry began, because remember John 2:11 tells us the first miracle was in Cana of Galilee. He didn't perform any miracles. And one of the great things is, as I remember reading this, and it just kind of sent shivers down my spine. It was from this one New Testament commentary about the beginning of the 20th century, and it was talking about when Jesus first appeared, at his baptism, and it said something to this effect: whatever he said or whatever he did before, he was prepared for now or what he's about to do, and when he was baptized, the Father said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." No miracles, no great discourses, but living a consistent life, loving God, obeying everything that was set in form before his public ministry began. So whatever happened in those years, and God has kept it silent, he hadn't told us. What we do know is what happened, from the time he was baptized to the time he was ascended into heaven. And that's the important thing. So we know very little about the earlier years. And again, because the emphasis is on his public ministry. But you think about it, I think we've talked about this, Tom, the Gospel of John, over half the Gospel of John just deals with the last 8 days of his life. And so it's not a biography, and especially John's Gospel, of the life of Christ. It's just these, things the Lord wanted us to know about, these important things. So as John wrote in chapter 20, verse 30 and 31, many other things Jesus did in the presence of his disciples that are not written in the book. These are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and that by believing you'd have life in his name. And so again, the Gospels tell us everything we need to know. There's a lot of things we would like to know. There certainly weren't unimportant years, but there were no miracles and no great teachings. That's what we do know.
Thank you very much. I mean, there's so many confusing things out there. They just confuse people. This next question, I mean, this might seem odd, but it's out there because of movies and paintings and so forth. And I know this won't take long, but what did Jesus look like?
Well, he probably didn't look like Jeffrey Hunter in King of Kings with blue eyes and sort of like blonde hair. That's probably a good given, isn't it? Since he was Jewish, we don't know. Here's the thing. Now think about this. His appearance was not outstanding. Why do we know this? We don't know at all what he looked like. For one, number one, remember when he was in a group of 11 other men, Judas is coming with the soldiers and that to arrest Jesus. He said, it's the person I give a kiss to is the one you have, he's the one. And what does that tell us? Number one, he wasn't outstanding looking, or he wasn't a head taller. In other words, not the tall guy. If he's taller than everybody else, just get the tall guy. Didn't do that. Or when the shorter than everybody else, get the short guy. He had to pick him out of a group of 11 other men. And also remember on the day of his resurrection, he was mistaken for the gardener. So again, nothing about him. Now, we know he wasn't ugly or deformed because little children came up to him. They won't come up to usually to people that, that people, if they have this, some type of deformity there. Now, what's interesting, there's a testimony from the early church father Eusebius that there was a statue made of Jesus and it was placed in the city of Caesarea Philippi. The anti-Christian Roman Emperor Julian the Apostate supposedly destroyed it. We're told Luke, the author of the third gospel, painted a portrait of Jesus. The early church father Eusebius mentions this having occurred, but nothing knows what happened to it. And then, of course, there's a whole other story, the Shroud of Turin. That was the whole other issue, supposedly the burial cloth of Christ. But here's the thing, Tom, and here's what's important. Like 1 Samuel 16:7, when the Lord chose David of the sons of Jesse, it said, man looks on the outside, but God looks on the heart. So purposely, God didn't tell us what Jesus looked like, but what we do know, he wasn't outstanding in his appearance. In other words, he wasn't the tall guy, he wasn't the short guy, he wasn't a deformed guy. He looked just like a normal first century Jewish person. Beyond that, we're just not told.
Yeah, thank you very much. So you mentioned the Shroud of Turin. So what do we know about it? Is this something with validity or I see videos on it and some people insist upon it. What do we know about it?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, actually. I've been looking at that for years. And naturally, we should be skeptical of something like this whenever we hear something like this. But there are some things about it that have convinced many good scientists and Bible believers, that there's really no natural explanation for it. And there are people that have attempted to do that. What I've read, there's a man who was named Barry Schwartz, I believe is his name. He's not a Christian, he's a Jewish fellow, and he was one of on the Shroud committee that looked at the Shroud in I think it's 1980s, and he's been dealing with it ever since. He's convinced it's the actual burial cloth of Christ, and it really, has turned his life around. So there's a lot of people out there that really believe it is, and it's something like that. You want to suspend judgment. You want to look at the evidence. But there are some really interesting things about it that would seem very hard for a forger in the Middle Ages to do with respect to what's on that. But again, what we don't want to do, I won't mention his name. There was a man who used to be very famous in the Christian field around where we're at in the early 2000s and such. He's with the Lord now. But I remember I was speaking someplace in Pacific Northwest, and he had spoken a week before me, and he made the point, we know Jesus came back from the dead because of the Shroud of Turin. No, that we don't know he came back from the dead because of the Shroud of Turin. We know because the four Gospels tell us that. The eyewitnesses tell us that. That's where we have to be very, very careful.
That's an interesting comment. All right, so we don't know much about Joseph, Jesus' earthly father. Maybe we can get into that another time, and Mary also. But I'm curious, well, actually, I know the answer to this, but a lot of people don't. I was raised Catholic. I was led to believe that, Mary's a virgin, and she was always a virgin, and she never had any other children besides Jesus. Did Jesus have any brothers and sisters?
Yeah, and that's a great question. According to Mark 6:3, he did. He had 4 brothers and at least 2 sisters. Now, there is actually, believe it or not, there was one great Protestant interpreter. I believe it was there are 2 Lightfoots. It was Joseph Barber Lightfoot, I believe, who argued. He actually argued the same argument the Roman Catholics argued, that they weren't, actual brothers and sisters of Jesus. But what I think solves it, in Matthew chapter 1, it says Joseph didn't know Mary in a physical way until she gave birth to her firstborn son. So the natural effect is, when you read about this, that he had 4 brothers. 2 of them we know about, James and Jude, at least 2 sisters, because sisters plural. So he had a family. He was the oldest, obviously. And we're told his brothers didn't believe in him. But when you let's put it this way, if you didn't have any preconceptions of this, you read the Gospels, it would very much seem like they were his full brothers and sisters, and full brothers in the sense that same father and mother. Jesus' father was, God the Father, but I mean, same mother, and they were. But Joseph, his earthly father, was the actual father of the rest of them. That's, the evidence is pretty much goes that way. There's people that can argue, but I don't think the arguments are very strong. We deal with this in our book, Did Jesus Exist? Are the documents about him reliable? And the best evidence seems to be that little word "until" in Matthew chapter 1, they didn't know each other physically or sexually until she gave birth to the firstborn son. So it seems, yes, he had brothers and sisters.
Excellent explanation. By the way, again, you can find Don at educatingourworld.com. And some of these questions I have are taken from his series on Jesus Christ. And in that series, Did Jesus Exist? Is just one of them. And just tons of questions that are answered there. Another one in that series, The Life and Ministry of Jesus Christ. Another one, What Everyone Needs to Know About Jesus. And still more, The Case for Christianity, The Resurrection of Christ, The Gospel According to Matthew, Answering Accusations About Jesus. And in each one of those subjects, there's just tons and tons of questions and answers that you can find. Again, Educating Our World with Don Stewart. Don, thank you again for joining me. This is terrific. I'm so glad that you agreed to do these programs, that we can educate our world, both the believer to strengthen them and those who are just wanting to know more about the truth of what the Bible actually teaches in Christianity. Thank you, Don.
Welcome.
God bless you, everyone.